I believe we'll get started. Good evening. Welcome to an Indigenous conversation for Pentucket, hosted by the Pentucket Retire the Sachem Coalition. My name is John Siegfried, and I will be a moderator for this hour-long meeting along with my colleague, Mrs. Erin Cherry. Erin and I are history teachers at Pentucket Regional High School, and it is our honor to meet with all of you. Thank you for being here, and especially our 4 invited guests. And I'll introduce Mrs. Erin Cherry right now. Erin?
Thanks, John. So as John said, I'm Erin Cherry, history teacher at Pentucket, and I'm really delighted to be moderating this discussion with John Siegfried. And before we get to introducing the 4 speakers who have generously given us their time this evening, I'd just like to speak a little bit about the coalition and the aims of this meeting for all the community members that I see joining. I'm so happy to see some familiar names, alumni, former students, parents. I'm really pleased with the crowd that we're getting, so welcome to everyone who's joining. The coalition is made up of current members of the Pentucket community as well as alumni. The group's goals are to gather information on Indigenous culture, experiences, and specifically the retirement of Native American mascots. So recently the coalition looked to hold an event where Indigenous speakers could share their voices, their perspectives, their experiences with the Pentucket community. They put in a lot of hard work to get us here, and tonight's meeting is that goal coming to fruition. We have 4 nationally known Indigenous activists and advocates here with us tonight, and I'm really looking forward to talking with all of them. So I'll hand it back to John.
Thanks, Erin. I need to inform you that this meeting will be recorded. Also, Erin and I are moderators for this event and we'll be posing questions submitted by the coalition and by the community at large. In this role, we don't personally represent the coalition and we don't represent the school district. And we also have many more questions than an hour is going to resolve, so we'll need to be somewhat brief. And I'd like to introduce the 4 speakers. Rhonda Anderson is with us of the Inupiaq Athabascan. Rhonda Anderson is originally from Alaska. Currently lives in Western Massachusetts and works with schools in Western Massachusetts and the 5-college system. And she is the Western Massachusetts Commissioner on Indian Affairs for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So Rhonda Anderson, thank you so much for joining us today. Anawan Whedon.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's that Zoom delay, sorry. Anawan Whedon is of the Pequot and Mashpee Wampanoag. From what I understand, grew up in Rhode Island, lives in Mashpee, Massachusetts today. He is a consultant, a presenter, a performing artist. He has worked with sharing his culture of his tribes with the wider world for years. He's worked with Plymouth Plantation, the Smithsonian Institute, National Geographic, History Channel, Scholastic, PBS, Harvard, the list goes on and on. So Anawan Whedon, thank you very much for being here tonight.
We also have Molly and Dana of the Penobscot in the state of Maine. Molly and Dana is an elected member of the Penobscot Nation Tribal Council and the first tribal ambassador of the Penobscot Nation. She has worked throughout her life to educate communities and share information about her culture with the wider world. So thank you, Molly and Dana, for joining us tonight.
Having me.
And we also have Amanda Blackhorse. Amanda Blackhorse is a member of the Navajo Nation and is from Big Mountain, Arizona. She is a founder of the Arizona to Rally Against Native American Mascots. She was also a petitioner to remove the trademark registration of the Washington, D.C. NFL team name and is a social worker in Phoenix, Arizona. So thank you, Amanda Blackhorse, for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me.
So as I mentioned just a bit earlier, we do have a lot of questions. We'd like to direct some questions to certain people, but certainly if you have something to weigh in on at any time, that's what this is about, and we'd really love to hear from you. One of the primary focuses of the group is to, of course, find out about experiences with mascots, your personal experiences perhaps with mascots, and just also to know more about your communities and your experiences growing up. We have a group that's largely high school or out of high school kids, and also a larger community that's really invested in the Pentucket school district. So they would like to have information. If I could pose this first question to Rhonda Anderson. I understand you moved to Massachusetts from Alaska when you were a girl, and you attended a school with a Native American mascot. Could you talk a little bit about that experience?
Sure. Yeah, Pagana ako yanak nalag nigavin. Thank you, and thank you for listening. So I've lived here in Western Massachusetts for most of my life, and I maintain connections both to my Native community here, but also my homeland communities in Alaska. I have been a longtime activist on the removal of Native mascots, as well as you mentioned, an alum. And I have a mother, I'm also a mother of a child in these districts with these mascots. My child does not go to a high school in this district because I do not want her to have the same issues that I did with a Native mascot. Instead, I have proudly, and as we all do, proudly cheered her on as an aardvark and as an otter in a private school and a charter school. I went to Mohawk Trail Regional High School, which has the team name of the Warriors, and Turners Falls High School, which went through a name change of their team in 2017 from the Indians to Thunder. Mohawk Trail Regional High School has recently removed their images, warrior images, and a large mural in the gymnasium. And it's possible that they'll be taking another vote when school session begins again to fully make the change away from warriors. At least they had hinted that in their last school committee meeting, that perhaps they had rushed to make a decision, and a decision that they weren't comfortable with. So my experience in both of these schools was I felt angry and ashamed. There was lots of wearing feathered headdresses and war paint and tomahawk chop chanting, especially during school spirit week. It was really challenging to be there. And I really had a hard time identifying. Of course, I'm from Alaska, so I even had a little bit more of a challenge identifying with other Native. There was very few Native students in the school, and to have this as a representation made it very difficult for people to see me for who I am. I think I'll let somebody else go on.
So I think we want to hear from each of you on this issue to start us out. So I'll go next to, if you're comfortable, I'll ask this one of Molly and Dana. I understand you also had experiences confronting Native American mascots when you were young, and you've also been heavily involved in the efforts in the state of Maine, to the successful efforts to ban Indigenous mascots in public institutions. So if you could share your experiences with us, I think that would be a nice next point for us in this meeting.
Sure, thank you for the question. So the first time that I had any kind of conflict about my identity was I was around 6 or 7 years old, and I was watching Walt Disney's Peter Pan. And up until then, I knew that I was Native. My parents are both Penobscot. They taught me language, stories, songs, and dances and stuff. So I had, in my vision, what I was, when I saw the kids in Never Never Land and Peter Pan meeting the Indians, which, you know, why are there Indians in Never Never Land, right? So when I see them dancing and acting out the song, that what makes the red man red, they're using the S word, the women are kind of trollish, or they're this oversexed version of Tiger Lily. You know, I remember being very, very young and vividly feeling at conflict with that. So I kind of shoved that away, I think, you know, as children do. You know, you cope and get through things. So then in high school, I was watching two different teams, two schools that I didn't go to, playing each other, and they were the Indians and the Warriors, and both teams were just decked out in the fake dresses. They're doing the whooping, they're dancing, and they have fake war paint on the cheerleaders as they conduct the band and stuff. And I got really angry, and I think a lot of those feelings from when I was a child, of confusion and anxiety, kind of came back. And I was lucky to have some good mentors that guided me through that in a way that allowed me to really find my voice about it. I started speaking to high schools, kids, my peers. You know, I tell this story a lot. I walked into a gymnasium once, and the school was the R-Skins, and they all had the jerseys on with the symbolisms and the, you know, the Indian headdress and everything. And they all booed me. And as I was 16 years old, going to sit on a panel and talk to them. So, you know, I learned at that age to associate, you know, these people don't like me. You know, these people are afraid of this change, and maybe they hate me because I'm bringing it to their attention. So at a young age, feeling all those things, you know, your emotions are raw and everything. So as I got older, you know, I've been at this a long time now, over 20 years, and I've learned how to dissect a lot of that defensiveness and a lot of that hatred, and, you know, see it in a very human way. And I've also learned how to work at it from a policy level. In my role as ambassador, I am the representative to the state legislature. So as soon as I was appointed, I started kind of coalition building with other lawmakers, writing this legislation, and really hustled throughout the whole state and had a lot of meetings with the governor. And we were able to, it was mostly party line votes, Democrats supporting it in the House and our state Senate, but we were able to kind of use the framework of our government right now to get this through. And honestly, in Maine, it's been a great change. I think it's brought about a lot of good discussions around race, and my children are 11 and 13, and feeling like I may have saved them a lot of those feelings that I had as a young person, gives me a lot of hope.
Well,
Thank you
very
for
much.
sharing.
Thank you very much for that. Anna Van Whedon, the same question to you, as far as you're comfortable about your experience growing up and your take on mascots. Oh,
Anna Juan, you're muted.
you're gonna need to unmute.
Myself. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Can you hear? All right. My apologies. I've been identifying myself as a Native American my entire life. Unfortunately, I was forced to live in situations where everyone else did not, and some still do not. And it starts in the educational system, of course. One of my biggest issues whenever I've been asked, Rhonda actually has asked me to assist her with her own daughter's schooling, and the imagery that was being portrayed there, which I was glad to help. Natick changed their red men, clearly an offensive name and logo, to the Red Hawks. We were very successful in that. venture that was back probably around '08. That public forum like this, and you didn't have the internet between you, and it was borderline almost violent. Verbally, it was. We were literally attacked for our identity, and it's something that I've just grown accustomed to, unfortunately, and it's something that I don't think any child should have to. And I don't think that anyone here who has a child, let alone anyone here who is affiliated with a school district who raises children, wants to see children being put in these situations that we've already had two speakers speak clearly to. I myself was denied my identity. I was told that our tribes did not exist. I was raised in Rhode Island. My mom is Wampanoag. I'm enrolled in her tribe, the same tribe that fed the Pilgrims and where they washed ashore. Being raised in Rhode Island, predominantly Caucasian community, it got increasingly worse. My parents did step in at times to address the faculty who were denying me my rightful identity. When I had to speak up on my own people's behalf, when we were being written out of history, I was disciplined. I was disciplined in front of the group, in front of my peers. I was sent to the principal's office. I was given detention. If it continued, I was suspended. And that was usually when my parents would step in. I became a parent at a very young age, and it was pretty obvious to me that this has to continue. However, the burden should not be placed on parents. It should not be put on children to defend themselves in these situations. And I think I'm hoping that majority of the folks who are making these decisions in the school systems are blatantly unaware. So it's my job to point out those ramifications. Every decision, every action has repercussions, of course. People have to be held accountable for those actions. And as a school district, again, I've been asked by many school districts to address this situation, and Natick was the Redman. That's a clearly offensive name. That was a pretty simple conversation. For those of you who aren't familiar, Nauset, where the Pilgrims actually washed ashore out on Cape Cod, is the home of the Nauset Warriors. They had some pretty atrocious imagery at one point, which was then relocated to what I contribute to a more Eastern woodland headdress. You have your feathers here in the East. You can't run through the woods with your feathers sticking straight up like you see in Hollywood movies. So those war bonnet headdresses simply aren't practical. And again, it's misinformation that's being taught in an educational school system. Then we have to explain ourselves as the individuals that that is not our identity. People who go their entire lives, teachers who have been teaching in school their entire careers, who have never addressed this information themselves. So I think it's important to address the issue of education as a whole. I think that it's a lot more than just the imagery that has brought about this conversation. I would like to also close and conclude in these impacts. There's a high dropout rate among Native Americans, high alcoholism, drug addictions, suicide. And I can personally attest, knowing that my own brother committed suicide, it had a lot to do with what we were put through in our upbringing in the school system. So I just want to make sure that that resonates with every listener out there. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, so much of your personal experience. It's very important for us all to hear. So Amanda Blackhorse, I'd also really, we'd all like to hear your stance on Indigenous mascots, as well as your experiences, as a young person and an adult with the issues confronting Indigenous communities. So if you'd be willing to share your experiences, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I came into this fight when I was in college. I attended a university called Haskell Indian Nations University, which was an all Native American college in Lawrence, Kansas. And I'm originally from the Navajo Nation, deep in the res. A lot of people, actually the place I grew up is not even on the map. And so I grew up very sheltered from the rest of the world. You know, we hardly had access to TV, the media. So my upbringing was, I didn't really experience what the outside world was like until I left to go to college. We did go into border towns nearby to go shopping, to go to Walmart or something, to get groceries, but you know, we would always return home. And so for me, I experienced racism in those border towns, but I really wasn't sure exactly why or what it was. It was just like, okay, people are racist, just ignore them. You know, when they call you stupid Indian or, you know, make remarks to you in restaurants and stuff. And so I just kind of didn't really think about it. And then it wasn't until I went to an all Native American university and I was able to learn from Native American professors and read about the true history of Native people, not only Native history, but American history. And it just really, like, it was a mind-blowing moment to really see how much had been hidden from us, because I went to a public school. So people didn't teach us. What we learned was that the pilgrims came and then Indians ate with the pilgrims and everything was great after that. Or Columbus discovered America and, you know, we should all honor Columbus. That was exactly what I learned in school. And I went to an all Native school. It was probably 99% Native. And so if I'm receiving that type of education, I know that other people all over the world, all over the United States, are also receiving the same education as I did. And so that, I think that's where the problem is that we're not teaching people the correct history of this country and what has happened to Native people and why we live in the conditions that we live in today. And so when I went to college, it was very mind-blowing because I was able to see that. And that's where I first got involved with the mascot issue. And I met some other Native students. They're very radical in their thinking, and I was very empowered by that. We formed a group called Not in Our Honor, and we went to go protest at the time, Lawrence, Kansas is right out of Kansas City, Missouri. And so at the time, the Washington NFL team was playing at Kansas City. So it was like Native versus Native, and it was this huge deal because it was the first time in a long time that had happened. And so, you know, we went and we peacefully protested. You know, we didn't say very much, and we had signs. And I couldn't believe, first of all, was just what happens at these games. The type of mockery of our culture, the feathers, the red face, the way that people, I mean, there was a porta potty that was in the shape of a teepee. And I mean, just everywhere you looked, it was just everywhere. And I couldn't believe it because I'm thinking, like, this is our people. These are our ceremonial items, the feathers that people mock, the headdresses that people wear. And what also was appalling to me was seeing how people reacted to us. When we're holding a sign that says, I am a human being, not a mascot. People would get so outraged by that. And it's like, you're actually trying to mock me. You're mocking my culture. Why is it that you're so upset by that? If anyone should be upset, it should be me. And so you know, just seeing that logic and the way that people see Native people, I really feel like these mascots and the mockery, the stereotypes of us, all of that leads to violence towards Native people. You know, people threw their beers at us. They called us all kinds of horrible names. Go back to your reservation, go get drunk. I'm like, wow, I didn't even know some of these stereotypes existed of us. And so that was mind blowing to me. And I think that mascots really robs us of truly showing who we are as Native people. We can't share who we are because all of these things are in the way, all these barriers, because people only want to see what they see on TV and in Western movies. And so that's why I got involved in it, and I became very passionate about it. I got involved in a legal case after that. Suzanne Harjo, who had filed the case against the Washington team in 1999. You know, our case was kind of a continuation of her case. But I mean, this was over, the legal issue had been going on for years and years, since 1992 until 2018. And we shouldn't have to go through all of that and use all these resources that we have to fight something that is, you know, we deserve the basic humanity of just being looked at as human beings. And so that's how I got involved.
Thank you very much. In the interest of getting through over or removing barriers, Molly and Dana, one question I have here is about how people from Pentucket could work with Indigenous cultures to learn, to connect, to know about people that previously occupied this land, or still do, of course, but about that, the history, the culture. How does a group like the 3 towns of Pentucket, how do they connect? Is there a way to gather information, make connections, or just any advice you would have on that?
I think none of that can happen in a real way until all of the mascots are gone. That has to be the bottom line. I think that, you know, in my work in different communities in Maine, when communities are embracing this Indian mascot and they're so comfortable with these stereotypes, like you've heard us all talk about, they aren't able to see us as human beings. They have like a mental block about it. You know, we've talked about, Amanda touched on the violence at protesters. You know, there's a town in Maine I can't go to alone because people there talk about killing me and hanging me from a teepee and raping me, my dead body. I mean, it's like serious stuff. So, and I think that these mascots, it gets so ingrained that we're not people, that we're objects. So why would anybody care about our feelings or our history or our communities or what we're offering? So just to set that as a baseline, I firmly feel no meaningful connections take root when these mascots are still being used. I think that a lot of efforts are awesome and we keep putting the effort there, but I do think that in order to be in any kind of connecting between cultures, there has to be equality, and we are never equal when we're being used as mascots. So with that being said, I do think that we can use the goodwill, and obviously you have a great network here and a group of people that want to really do the right thing. I think that you go to the local, you know, you learn about the local history of the tribes without putting the burden of that on the tribes. So I know that there's usually a network of Native people that will do education and will do guest speaking. Make sure you're valuing their time and compensating them. You know, I think in the intro we talked about Anawan does some of this with museums and stuff. You know, a lot of Natives are doing this work and they're really good at it. Make sure that you're using authentic Native presenters and artisans and educators. You know, some people up here around our way, Natives are running museums and working in museums. So I would make sure you're kind of getting the real thing and not, you know, falling for kind of people that are misappropriating our culture and trying to profit off of us. So I think that's a tricky question and it's complicated, and I wish I could be more rosy about it. But I feel like you're doing a really great thing, using your platform and your privilege to try to do away with these mascots. I think that's such an awesome first step. And as I've seen in Maine, when mascots are off the table, that's when the real growth and connection happens.
So I think in the interest of time, we'll kind of continue to direct our questions at individual speakers. So I'm just going to kind of move around and make sure I hit each one of you. If you feel like you want to respond to the question I ask and I don't ask it to you, please chime in. So I'm going to direct this one at Anawan Whedon. I think many on this call want to hear a perspective on this question, because it's the key argument we see against changing our mascot and for keeping our mascot. Many people in this community who are in favor of keeping the Sachem mascot would argue that they're proud, but the school is representing a leader and a warrior. And I'm kind of paraphrasing some arguments I've seen made frequently. They believe that they are honoring Indigenous people by representing the Sachem as our mascot. I'd like to hear from Indigenous people about how you would respond to that argument. So if Anawan, Whedon, if you would share your response to that, I think that'd be really great for this community.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me? I'm going to assume everyone can hear me. Personally, myself, I'd like to have others chime in. Any of the other native speakers who would like to. I believe I may be one of the closest as far as regional representatives. The word sachems is something that Sonchum is how we pronounce it in our language, one of many dialects that use an Algonquian language base, and it does in fact mean leader. Looking over the text that accompanies the homepage of the Pentucket Athletics, I looked at that earlier, and a lot of the words reflect our leadership, our ethics and integrity I saw was specifically mentioned. However, I don't know if the actions of the school district are pairing up with those words. Point being, cases such as Jim Thorpe are a classic example of Native Americans who have actually excelled in athletics. Athletics are rewarding experiences, even just in the training for the sport itself. They have good skill sets. Many of these are on par with what we do. I myself, I'm not a representative of the Pentucket region. I'm a Wampanoag from a little further south in Massachusetts. So again, I'm familiar with their terminology. It's similar to ours. I can't speak, and that's why, again, if any of the other natives, I do speak on my father's behalf. We're generational learners. We learn from our elders, and my father is not a fan of taking taking away blatant racist monuments. For example, the state seal here in Massachusetts, the English sword over the Native American's head. Rule by the sword is basically the message that's being perpetuated on every every Massachusetts state symbol. Most Massachusetts are totally unaware of this. Many actions being done to do away with it. People like Hadfield. What a great example of the racist mentality that not only started but sometimes exists here. So in that respect, I want to put in my own father's interpretation of how to view these monuments. As far as where we are at this juncture, knowing all that's going on in America right now, again, looking at the imagery that I saw, that's a very simple conversation. It is inaccurate, it's misinforming, and as an educational institution, you're kind of making yourself look foolish. As far as the actions that any tribal members take place in these games, a lot of these folks, I don't know if they know enough to know that they're making stuff cool, but it's usually common knowledge for most of the second and third graders that I work with throughout the Commonwealth schools that they would know better. So for a school like a high school, like the Pentucket Regional High School, to continue doing these things, again, I think it would be advantageous to start addressing these issues ASAP. Again, the second and third graders that I'm working with now, they're going to be hitting that high school and they're going to be challenging this issue, so it's not going to go away. I'm very fortunate to not only be invited to this conversation, but really to actually make an impact in children's lives that they do remember. I've met many of my second and third grade students that I work with who are now in college, and they clearly remember a lot that I was able to share with them, the 1 hour that I was able to spend with them.
So I'm Mr. Whedon, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
I also would love to hear more from the guests here on this conference call, but from what I'm hearing, a lot of them.
So I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but our connection with you seems to be really poor. So John Siegfried, if you want to ask a question to another speaker.
Thank you very much. Rhonda Anderson, I have a question here from a community member, and I'll read it. I read an article by WBUR in 2017 that did a piece asking members of the Wallamanapog tribe during a powwow how they felt about the Tewksbury R-Men mascot. There was a general feeling of being okay or proud of Indigenous mascots by the older generation, and a general feeling of disrespect and being against Indigenous mascots by the younger generation. How would you communicate your feelings for retiring the Sachem mascot with that context in mind?
Oh gosh, that's kind of a loaded question, isn't it? Because Anawan is Wampanoag, so I would hate to be, answering on his tribe's, behalf. So, gosh, I mean, what can I say? I can just talk about, these are stereotypical representations, and it erases the identity of Native people and generates stereotypes about what a Native person looks like and portrays us as people in the past. So your Sockham sachem, you say, your Sockham mascot is honoring somebody in the past. It's keeping somebody in the past and also not doing justice to a true identity. It's sort of a pan-Indian compressed identity, an identity that celebrates more of a westward expansion, you know, Plains Indian style. That's what I'm thinking. I may be wrong, but I did a little looking earlier today, and I saw there was 2 maybe mascots that you have. I saw one, and it was a seal, and it had a feathered headdress mascot image. But you know, that kind of representation in an educational setting, it just leads to more widespread and acceptable stereotyping and biases. And again, you know, tagging on to my daughter in 3rd grade, Anna Wan had to come in. She learned very young that this type, you know, her words that she had to learn were heathen, squaw, savage, and that Native people were savages and they ate human meat off the bone. This is what she learned in 3rd grade, reading a nonfiction book. So that just sort of continues on through high school mascotry, where mascots are generally portrayed as warlike and aggressive and violent. And then that sets up, you know, our newspaper articles, Indians invade, town braces for attack. And so that leads your students to like struggle with that positive identity. So it's hard to say. I'm not going to answer for the Wampanoag, like the older generation and the younger generation, but it definitely leaves Native students struggling and non-Native students with only the stereotypes about who we are. And those portrayals create biases that dramatically affect our outcomes, because we have the highest rates of murder, sexual assault, suicide, incarceration, death from police brutality. And it can be really hard to visualize a future with yourself in it when you're facing this kind of erasure and violence. And as a Native woman, I found it's been really dangerous. Again, echoing Mullion, very dangerous to be speaking up for change. As a Native activist on this, I've been subject to verbal harassment, online harassment, stalking, death threats. And, you know, despite statements from tribes and communities and in decades of empirical research and evidence, it's difficult, you know, to have these conversations in schools that have mascotry, and having that relationship building is going to be really challenging. So I don't consider, I would not say that that is an honor, and I don't believe that it's an honor to have that image. Keeps Native people in the history, and it's stereotyping and incorrect. I feel like, you know, if you actually created education early on and have reciprocal, lasting relationships with local tribes, these questions will have answers that will become apparent once that education and relationships begin. But giving that intense burden and danger that's placed on the shoulders of an oppressed minority to attempt to make these systemic changes locally is really challenging. So I guess I'm not really answering your question, but I feel like that there is, you're gonna find some people who are older may be okay with it, or people that are not connected with their community and not seeing the challenges that this type of stereotyping does to our youth. So I would say no, it's not really honoring, and it's going to be challenging to find people, especially as us younger folk are growing older. It's going to be really hard to find people to agree with that this is an honoring situation.
Thank you, Rhonda Anderson. I think you actually answered some of this question, but I'd like to ask it directly to you, Amanda, Black Horse, as well, considering your role as a petitioner in the case to change the name of the Washington NFL team. So why do you think we haven't resolved issues of Native American mascots? Why is the name of the Washington NFL team, why is that even still up for debate?
So I think that if you look through history and in time and the way that Native people have always been viewed has always been through the lens of the Hollywood Indian. There's a real great historian called Phil Deloria who talked about this in a book called Playing Indian. And he talked about how one of the first images that came up on TV were of sort of that brave Native person, the noble savage or the Indian brave. And Chris Ear also talked about this in his documentary, Real Indians, where they talk about how there's different categories of that Native people were placed in historically. Like I said, the brave warrior, the noble savage, kind of the funny caricature of Native people. And there's some others, sort of common themes that come out. And, early on, people really took a liking to some of those images, especially some of the early immigrants in this country, because they were looking for something to really latch onto as an identity, because they had left their identity when they immigrated over here. And so to feel like they had a sense of place, it was with Native imagery. And it was that romanticized idea of Native people. And so those ideas and the imagery that you see that people are so attached to, which is, you see people constantly stereotyping the Plains Indians, right? The headdresses and the feathers and the war paint. And where I'm from, we don't wear headdresses. We don't wear feathers in our hair. But that's how people see us because of Hollywood and because that's been pushed so much and people just seem to love that. And so as time went on, people began to identify with that and think that just in mainstream culture, that's their identity. They've taken it on now. And, anywhere you go, you'll hear people who always say, I have a great-great-grandmother who was Cherokee, or had a great-great-grandmother who was a Cherokee princess, or I'm also Native. And people always choose Cherokee or Blackfeet, or, some of the more common tribes to say, I'm staking my claim in this country. And this is, who, and no one can tell me that I'm an immigrant. And so I think that people have sort of taken this sort of ownership over who we are, which is very bizarre to me. But I mean, this has been pushed through the media. This has been pushed through movies. And even me as a young person watching TV, watching a movie like Dances with Wolves, I didn't realize that they were Native like me. I thought that they were something else, other people. And it's so crazy to actually, see, grow up and really learn about the tribe and really learn about what happened. Not that story is true, but how through colonization, how Native people were affected by the soldiers. In here in the Southwest, we were affected by the Spanish and we were affected by the English. We were colonized by both. And so I think we have to really see it from a historical perspective and understand the mindset of every American and how they think about Native people. And then we have to unravel that And we have to then learn about who Native people are today. You know, I'm a Native person. I'm a modern Native person. I still speak my language. I still, you know, practice a lot of my traditions, and I still believe in a lot of our spiritual beliefs. And I'm passing that on to my children. And so people need to really see us as in a humanized manner. You know, first we need to stop dehumanizing Native people, which is looking at us through the lens of, you know, caricatures, stereotypes and stuff. And then we need to humanize the image of Native people and see us as we are today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Anna and Whedon reconnected. So I have another question for you. I have a question here that's a question about the place name Pentucket. And as you know, it's Pentucket Sachems, but the question is about whether you feel, or other people that you know feel, whether Sachem is the offensive name, but whether Pentucket could stay as a place name for a school. You could translate that out to many other school districts in Massachusetts and New England, and indeed across the country. So just if you wouldn't mind giving your perspective on a name like Pentucket, that would be extremely helpful.
Thank you again for allowing me to speak. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So words like Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Pentucket, I personally am proud to see those words remain. I don't want to speak for the other Native presenters who I'm sure have similar names that may reside in areas that they're from. Some of these names simply are out of place. I mentioned earlier, Sachem is how we pronounce the word. Sachem, Sachem, as you may pronounce it. The word means believe, as I mentioned earlier, so that in itself is something authentic.
Anna, I hate to step in on this, but we're having a lot of trouble understanding. Anna, we're having a lot of trouble understanding your audio, so we're just going to try. I'm going to see if Jack or Mac can make a quick fix on that. Thank you. So if I could just turn that question to any other of our guests, the question about place names. So Pentucket, Massachusetts, Tewksbury, I think. If we have a region or a city or a town or a place named with a indigenous name, a Native American name, how is that viewed is really the question. And could Pentucket become the Pentucket something else? So that's an open question to anyone.
I can jump in if you like. We have a lot of place names in Maine that come from Wabanaki words. And I think, you know, a lot of people kind of, when they disagree with changing the mascots, they throw this around a lot. They're like, well, then let's just change this and this and this. And, you know, up here in one of the towns, they say, well, what about, you know, they name on the place names, what about a Jeep Cherokee? What about, you know, all these, the Apache helicopters, and, you know, are we gonna have to change everything? And, you know, so we hear this quite a bit. And my thing with how place names are different than mascots, when you're calling yourself the Sachems or the Indians or any of these things, it's like you're putting us on as a costume and you're saying that you're us without dealing with the whole experience of being us. Without living with the intergenerational trauma and these lasting effects of colonization and attempted genocide and you know, like we were saying, our high rates of addiction and disease and all that sort of thing. So, and that's really harmful. You know, putting on Indian like a costume and then taking it off is something harmful to actual Indigenous people. So when we're talking about place names, I see that as, you know, that really is how our ancestors saw the land. In Maine, Katahdin means great mountain, and that comes right from our language. So I see place names, and my Native colleagues here may have differing opinions, but I see that as an actual way to keep our ancestral views in the conversation, and to spark education between cultures. And I see that as different than someone saying, "Oh, look at me, I'm a sachem, I'm a chief now." You know, so I think with the, you know, right now we're all talking about how things are named, we're all talking about what words mean, and it's such an important, impactful conversation, and I'm so glad we're having all of them. But up in Maine, place names have served as kind of a jumping off point in conversations, instead of a disrespect and a dishonor to us like mascots are.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think that brings us into a good bridge to this question, and I'm going to open it either to Rhonda Anderson or Amanda Blackhorse. Please just respond if you're comfortable responding. So how could we work as a Pentucket community to form relationships with Indigenous people in our community, as well as connect with the people and societies who previously occupied the land where we currently live, teach, work, learn? I hope everyone on this call is reflecting on the fact that we have not even been pronouncing the name correctly. So that really shows our disconnect with Native communities today and the history of the communities in this area. So how could we do a better job of forming those relationships and connecting with those people that we've clearly been missing?
I guess I'll take that one. How can you do a better job with connecting and building relationships, like reciprocal, lasting relationships with the local tribes that are still in the area in which your school is? So that would, I believe that would be Massachusetts tribe, Wampanoag tribe, and Nipmuc tribes. That you're sort of like right in the spot where they're all overlapping in that one area. So you have a lot of opportunities there, as those tribes are all still there, and you know, functioning today as tribal nations within our Commonwealth. So I guess, you know, we live in the age of information at our fingertips. We can also, between Anawan and I, and of course, Malian, we are all in the same area. We can maybe send information or contacts, but you know, you have 3 tribes that are right there, and just over the border, which is a European construct, the Massachusetts border crossed Native tribes. So, of course, Malian is the neighbor to the north. So you have lots of opportunities to make connections and get to know the Indigenous tribes of this area, and you know, ask them what they need lifted. What are the concerns of the tribes today? And I know that there's a lot of legislation that's before our House, you know, the state flag and seal, of course, passing the prohibiting Native mascot bill is also, so all of these things can be very helpful, as basically all the tribes in Massachusetts support these bills that are in legislation right now. So you have an amazing opportunity to do that, and totally recommend that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I believe we have just a bit more time. And Molly and Dana, I wanted to ask, in your experience in working in Maine with districts that were changing mascot names, I wondered if you could weigh in on this question, and I'll read the question that was submitted, and then I'll amend it a little bit or add to it a little bit. The question is, what would you tell someone that says the mascot's been this way for years? Why would we change it now? And then my amendment to that is, I've talked with people who said, look, we're the third or fourth generation of Sachins. This is something that will be taken from us. Now, I can see how that might land, but that is where people will be at, saying their tradition that was built starting in 1954 in this region is the thing that they care about. And how, in your experience, have you seen people deal with that type of change or confront that kind of new reality? Or have you seen people successfully step away from that and change their minds? Or just some ideas on that is really my question. Thank you.
Oh, I have seen it all. So in Maine, we've had about 20 schools make the change in the 20 or so years that I've been at this. And some changes go really well. Sometimes schools bring about the idea on their own, and they bring it to their school board and just say, you know, this is probably outdated. We want to be on the right side of history. Let's move on. They choose a new mascot. They rally around it. You know, there we go. Other cases are very, very messy. And the points that you bring up are super common in these towns. I spoke at Skowhegan High School, one of the many, many times I spoke there. And a gentleman that served on the school board came up to me after, kind of loomed over me. He put his finger in my face and he said, I'm just as Indian as you are, and Skowhegan is my tribe. So I'm 5 feet tall and I'm not very big, you know, so he's like leaning over me, you know, pointing and yelling. And, you know, thankfully my father was there and everyone kind of like got me away. But that attitude, you know, these are really an interesting study in human psychology, what we attach to, what we identify with. And what I tell people is, when you change the mascot, you're still going to be proud of your school. You're still going to be proud of your families and your traditions and your excellence in athletics and all of that. You're going to have a new mascot that you can actually feel good about, that reflects who you are. The town of Skowhegan is less than 1% Native American according to the census. So this man was absolutely not as Indian as I am. And, you know, that's just how it is. So I think a big tool in this toolkit is hearing from people like us on the call, hearing our human experiences. Something in this work that I found is that, you know, I've sat on many panels with, you know, elders as old as 80 something talking about this mascot and how it affects them. You know, one older lady from the Passamaquoddy tribe said, you people actually want to be us? Do you know what I lived through? So to her, she was like, why are we even having this conversation? Like, you know, it's not like cool to be us. Like, do you know what I faced? So I think when you start to hear those things, you can, you know, draw on your own humanity. We all have grandmothers, you know, most of us, and we can relate to that. So I've seen that as useful in breaking a lot of these things down. And Old Town High School, which is right across the bridge from my reservation, they were the Indians for years and years and years. My father was an athletic record breaker there for football and basketball, and he would go to away games and they were hanging effigies of him in trees with headdresses on. So he's a native man of Penobscot, and he didn't put together until I was a teenager having my awakening that that was racist and that was hate speech at him. He just thought, well, it's the Indians, you know, and it was his jersey number because he was the best player. So Old Town, a lot of Penobscot people go to that school. We approached them in 2005. We spoke at the school board meeting. It was a little messy. There were some entrenched feelings about it. They changed to the Coyotes. My little brother played on a football team against them the year after. Old Town won. they were all cheering and yelling in the corner and hoisting the kids up on their shoulders. And I pointed out to my dad, I said, look, they're just as proud to be coyotes as they were as Indians. Like, I promise you, there is life after these mascots, and it's better. It's like a weight has lifted. You don't have this controversy. You're not harming people. So that's what I try to stress to people, that we can intellectualize these things all day. There's plenty of data. There's plenty of studies, but you're looking at for Native people here, you know, in our eyes, you can see how we feel about this and how it's affected our families. And then that's been the key in my work to a lot of this change.
Thank you.
So I'll ask a similar question to you, Amanda Blackhorse. You mentioned in your previous answers, I'm really glad you actually mentioned this, how the Washington NFL team is really like an eraser of your history and the varied history of the many different indigenous cultures present in America today. You also mentioned how immigrants to America took on Native imagery and used that for their own kind of assimilation into American culture. One of the big arguments we see made for keeping our mascot is actually a similar argument for why you and the other speakers on this call believe that it should be removed, and many in this group as well. So what is your response to people in our community who state that removing an Indigenous mascot is erasing history?
Well, I hear that so much with the Washington team fight, because they started around, I believe, in the 1930s. When did the school begin with your mascot?
Our school was built in 1954. That's when we became a regional district and adopted, as far as I know, my parents went to the district, and I've grown up in the community a long time. It has always been, as far as I know, as it stands today.
Okay, so a lot of the mascots, if you look back in history, college, professional sports, and in schools as well, a lot of these mascots began around the same time. It was after the turn of the century. The Washington team came about 1930s, and that was around a time of assimilation of Native people, during the time of boarding schools where Native children were forcibly taken from their parents and put in boarding schools. Carlisle, Pennsylvania is one place that a lot of people know. The university that I went to, Haskell Indian Nations University, was another one, where children were removed in mass numbers, and a lot of children died there. A lot of children who we don't even know some of their names, who are missing or just passed away from starvation or disease, and or because they ran away and they succumbed to the elements. So, and a lot of it, abuse happened there. So that's where a lot of the trauma within our communities began. So this was right around the time when these mascots were starting. So at the time, Native people, we didn't have the ability, and fighting a mascot was not on our radar. We weren't concerned about what the Washington team name was. We were concerned about surviving, simply just surviving. And so when we look at the history and how over time, these things weren't something that we were really thinking about. And now, we're finally healing and talking about historical trauma, healing intergenerational trauma within our communities. And so this is a part of that healing for us. We're now beginning to understand it. We're beginning to see the effects of it. We're beginning to see how racism has contributed to, our society in general. And so when people talk about the history, I encourage the people to, and you say that it's your history, I encourage you to learn about our history and what was going on when a lot of these mascots came about. And it's not just about what you think and how you believe. Think about the people who have been really affected by this. And that's us here. It's our ancestors. They're not here to speak for themselves. You know, my grandmother, she was 99. She passed away about 6 years ago. She survived through all of that. She told me a lot of the stories that, you know, children were being removed and they would have to hide their kids and run into the woods and like find, you know, safe places, but they always found them. And the kids, they took the kids away, but the kids came back. They ran away and they came back and they would take them again. And so, you know, it's very traumatic for us to even talk about it too. And so I just would encourage people to think about that as well, is that it's not just about what you think. And, you know, the privilege is that you can, you know, use these images and cheer for your team and be proud of your team. But yet you can put that away at the end of the day and take that off as a costume, whereas we can't. And so learn about the history, because it's there. It's all over you. And I mean, also speaking of the Wampanoag, I mean, they're the first, from what I understand, first contact. A lot of the tribes along the East Coast are first contact tribes, and they've lost so much because they were affected first. And so you're not, what you see on the East Coast might be very different than what you see on the Navajo Nation and the way that we live there. And so what we do know is that the racism that we all face is the same across the board. And that's because of this idea of you know, people thinking that they can own who we are as Indigenous people, owning our names, owning our land. You know, we're still fighting for some of these basic rights to live and survive in this day and age. How is this happening in a first world country? You know, some of my family don't even have running water in their homes. How is that even happening to this day? So I just encourage people to look at the historical facts first before saying this belongs to you, because it doesn't. This is our identity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we've run through our time for formal questions. I did want to ask our guests if there are any last thoughts that you had, things that came up that you'd like to put forward that maybe we didn't have time for. And if anyone has the opportunity to speak, I want to probably push him to the front of the line after our connection problem. So I just wanted to open that up. Any last thoughts?
I would encourage you all to get civically engaged around these bills in your legislature. Give them teeth, make them meaningful. Don't let them get watered down. Our bill up in Maine was very simple and straightforward. Ban the use of Indian mascots. That's it. It doesn't need to be candy coated. So I would encourage you all to talk to your representatives and your state senators. I've done it both ways. I've gone to each school and made the case and did it from a statewide level. You can do both approaches, but it's really important to have this legislation implemented. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Anawan, are you, any last thoughts that you might have?
Make sure to unmute.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't have control of that for the longest time. So again, my apologies, everybody, for these technical difficulties and whatnot. I want to thank Amanda for speaking on our behalf, especially all the issues that she pointed out with boarding schools. And a lot of folks, again, they're just not aware. Hallmark greeting cards, Charlie Brown cartoons, they have not done any of us justice, particularly those of us who grew up here in New England. Just as she attested that she was raised in a native school system on a reservation filled with native people, but she was fed the same lies. Here in Massachusetts, I literally had to defend myself against those lies. Even though the culture exists, the words still exist, like Massachusetts, and people don't even know what those words mean. It's not being stressed how important that is. I don't think it has been since the time of colonization. England came here, it's plopped its architecture here, it's plopped its language here. Nobody's to this day even taken the time to get familiar with their surroundings, even though we're still here. We're fortunate to still be here. We're fortunate to have any of the lessons that we were trying to share with the colonists when they first arrived. But, you know, Amanda really hit a good point that we don't have the luxury of taking that identity off, and the fact that our people were victimized for being proud of our identity. For our people we were outlawed from using our own name. Pequot, my father's tribe here in Connecticut, they were literally banned. They were outlawed from speaking the Pequot language and from actually calling themselves Pequot, let alone being Pequot, having Pequot culture and identity and being proud of it. They were denied that. That was actually written in legislature. That was before they were exiled through slavery. People like myself being denied. I wasn't supposed to have long hair. Natives weren't allowed to grow their hair. That was the first act of the boarding schools. Cut their hair, kill the Indian and save the man. For the same ancestors of some of those same people to have their children going to Cub Scouts, and again, I'm not targeting organizations like the Cub Scouts, but a lot of them don't realize that all of these badges and rites of passage programs, they're heavily built on emulating Native American culture, and it's for fun. It's for a badge. It's to get to the Order of the Arrow, which is the most elite of the Cub Scouts. And when you're in the Order of the Arrow, you literally have to study a tribe. You have to mimic that tribe to be eligible for the Order of the Arrow. So it's far beyond the school. It's far beyond this conversation, an hour or so that we've been given. I'm really grateful to have any part in this conversation. This is an ongoing conversation that we're going to have to continue, I hope. But I also want to point out the resources that I heard some people were expressing interest in. Powwows, they're a great opportunity to interact with individuals who still identify with that culture, to tap into it. COVID has obviously canceled a lot of them for this year. Our annual powwow in Mashpee, it's going on 99 years. It's about 100 years coming up in 2 years. It'll be our 100th year. So this is an ongoing celebration with cultural traditions that stem back far beyond the 100 years that we've been documenting that gathering. The museum down in Pentucket, Plymouth Plantation, I know when I was working at Boston Children's Museum, they do outreach where they'll come to the school and provide professional development with Native American educators. I would highly recommend the Pentucket region doing something like that. Somebody like the superintendent should instill something like that so that it's spread across the entire schools, not just the high school. Again, I know for a fact I have been to some of the schools in the Pentucket region, most of which are second and third grades, because fortunately we are in the state curriculum framework. So fortunately we will not be erased as long as the DOE keeps us in the state frameworks. But it's up to the schools to, again, see that importance and value. And I don't know, again, I just personally want to say thank you for allowing me to be a part of today's conversation.
Thank you. You are coming through loud and clear right now, for sure. The organizers in the coalition will certainly put together a way to, ask further questions or make contacts with you four. I know, in my brief search, I was able to see that you are all over internet, easy access, lots of stories and interest and information, TED Talks, and thank you for all of that work. And the Retire the Sachem Coalition, for those of you in the audience that are not connected, would like more connection, is at Retire the Sachem, I believe, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And you should be able to make connections there as well. And I personally just would like to thank you four for giving so much of yourselves in a forum like this, for taking the time, of course. This is just one of those moments where I feel like we learn so much so quickly. So that is a gift, and I appreciate that. And I just wanted to ask Erin Cherry, my moderator, if she had any last thoughts. And then one other thing is if our 4 guests could stay on for a minute and connect with some of the coalition members, that would be fantastic. And so appreciate it. Erin?
Thanks, John. Thank you. I'd just like to thank the 4 of you for, I think something that we haven't acknowledged is how much of your personal experience you've shared with us. I can speak for myself. I have the luxury of not having to share the intimate details of my childhood in order to defend my own identity. So I really think that that's something a lot of us take for granted. And I really appreciate your willingness to share that with all of us. And I think that this conversation was really fruitful, and it will continue as we and the coalition continue their work toward retiring the mascot. There is an opportunity here in this district with a new building on the horizon in a few years to really have a kind of reconciliation process begin, where, you know, we have a new start coming before us. And I think that this is a great step in the right direction to get these open lines of communication. And it wouldn't be possible without all of you coming here tonight and opening yourselves up to our community. So I can't thank you enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to be sure to ask Rhonda or Amanda if you had last thoughts before we push buttons.
No, I just want to thank you very much for hearing us tonight. Koyanak Nalak Nuigan, I thank you very much. I think it's very important to have these conversations and have our voices heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on as well. And I'm just really happy to meet some radical, awesome Indigenous activists as well. Thank you for sharing what you shared. I learned a lot as well. And I think that when we talk about the history, I just want people to also think about, you know, with the Washington team, you know, people don't know that, that the R word is actually comes from history, and in history they used that word to describe scalps of Native people. And so every single term that is used out there has some sort of meaning, and I encourage you all to look that up and read about it. It's out there. And I think Malan, you mentioned that there's a lot of information out there. There's new scientific data. There's new research studies that have been done. Dr. Stephanie Freiberg is someone that everyone should definitely look up and look at what she has done and how she has related the way that stereotypes affect the self-esteem of Native youth. And these aren't just sort of claims, these are actual scientific scholarly research that has been done. So there's a lot of information out there. Just look it up, and you can always visit our website too, nomoremascots.org, or I'm sorry, nomorenativemascots.org. So, and you have resources here as well. These Indigenous activists here have a lot of knowledge as well. And also, you know, Native people don't have to do the work all the time. You know, we have a lot of stuff that we probably are already working on. And with this case, just do it. Just make the change. That's all. It's that simple. Make the change. People will get over it. You know, move on to something else. You know, and it's look at it as a new beginning, because you can find a mascot and a name that that fits your community, and it's not racist. So thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you all so much. And that is the conclusion of our meeting here, our round table. And if I'll turn it over to Jack at this point, but our audience members, I appreciate you being here. And then, so Jack, I guess we're just gonna, well, you're the guy with the in charge, but goodbye to our 4 panel members. And thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.